No matter what area of multimedia production you work in, you are going to have to learn how to manage multimedia assets. The project elements and components of the multimedia projects that you work on are going to become numerous over time. You're going to accumulate a lot of data files, and trying to manage those files and keep them in some sort of a logical order where you'll be able to retrieve them when you need them and sort of have a logical framework for naming files and so forth is really important. So in this chapter, we're going to look at digital photo management. How do you handle storing and keeping track of digital images that you take with a personal camera or professional camera as you work within the area of multimedia related to photography? So to begin with, let me bounce over to my Finder window. I've connected an SD card reader to my computer, and that card reader is showing up down here in my device list as no name. There's one folder on the SD card named DCIM. And if you've done much work at all with digital photography, you'll know that this is somewhat of an industry standard naming protocol, that when you shoot images with a digital camera, that digital camera has been programmed to save those images in a file-based structure beginning with the root folder that usually has this name associated, DCIM, which simply stands for digital camera images. And this has become the industry standard sort of default naming protocol for storing images on an SD card in a digital camera. So if I open this folder up, I'll find a lot of other subfolders, and my pictures reside in these different subfolders that have different numbers on them based on the days that I happen to be out shooting those images. Well, I'm going to open up this first folder, and this folder contains 31 images, and if you look at the file naming protocol, they're all very similar. They have a prefix, which in this case is IMG, which is sort of abbreviated shorthand for image. The underscore character just to separate the prefix from the actual sequential number. And then there's a 4-digit sequential number that as I go through the images, they all increase by 1. And this is the camera's way of naming my individual images as they're acquired and recorded to the SD card. I don't have to keep this naming protocol because most likely I'm going to want to rename the images that I shoot and have something that's a little bit more logical in terms of associating these images with the project that they are representative of. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Adobe Bridge. If you're familiar with the Adobe suite of products, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, etc., and have purchased one of their many different software bundles, that bundle has probably included this utility called Adobe Bridge. It's a software package designed for managing digital photo assets, but you can also use it for managing other types of multimedia assets, including movie files and so forth. It's really just a way of interacting with content that is stored on a physical drive, and Bridge extends some of the basic file management types of things that you can do with your local operating system, and really kind of ramps it up a little bit and creates things that are more in tune with what a professional multimedia producer is going to need as far as asset management. So when I come into Adobe Bridge, I can see at the bottom of the screen the physical drives that are connected to my computer appear. Well, I'm going to click this one over here that says no name, and when I do that, it opens up in my content window. It gives me access to this DCIM folder. I'll double click on that, and that opens up the subfolders, and I'll go one more level into this subfolder that contains a series of 31 individual images, and I can select those images and I can preview them in here. The first thing I want to do is I want to transfer these digital images from my SD card to something that is more permanent, and in this particular case I'm using an external FireWire hard drive, and that's going to be a much more appropriate long-term storage medium for the images that I shoot and collect. I really don't want to leave them on the SD card, and as a matter of habit and practice, I try to shoot images and as soon as possible transfer the images from the SD card to a physical drive where they can reside more permanently over time, and I can have access to them from my laptop at any time that I want. So I'm going to select the 31 images by choosing Command A. All 31 images are now selected down here in the content pane of the window, and I'm going to go up to my Tools menu, and I'm going to use this option here called Batch Rename. And batch rename is going to allow me to do a couple of things. First, it's going to allow me to rename the images. Down here in the middle of the field, I can assign a new naming protocol, and I'm going to keep the same two fields that I have right now, which includes a text prefix followed by a sequence number. So I'm going to change the text prefix to Columbia 2012 because that's when the images were taken and that's where they were taken. And I'm going to include an underscore again to separate the text from the sequential number. And I'm going to keep a 3-digit number, but I'm going to begin with the number 1. And we'll change this to 3 digits. And up here above the file naming area, I can also assign a destination folder. I can choose a couple of options. One, I can rename these images and keep them in the same folder. Well, I really don't want to do that because part of what I'm doing right now is I want to make a backup copy of these images, and I want to transfer them from the SD card in which they were recorded and acquired to my FireWire drive. So I'm going to say copy to another folder, and I'm going to browse to select that folder, which hasn't actually been created yet. And I'm going to scroll down, I'm going to choose my FireWire hard drive, and I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this folder Columbia 2012 Original Pics, and I'm going to choose Create. And I'm going to execute the batch rename. So Adobe Bridge now is automating this for me. It's renaming the files, but it's also copying them individually to their new location. So when this procedure is finished, I'll have, in effect, 2 versions of these pictures. The original set of images on the SD card, and then the new set of images with their new file names on my FireWire drive. And there are my images. I go into icon view here, and you can see them labeled again Columbia 2012 _001 all the way down to the last image, which is 031. So a very, very quick way of creating that replicate set. Let me jump back over to Bridge. And the other thing I just want to mention briefly is I talk in Chapter 10 about metadata, file metadata. And I can select any one of these images. I'll do it from down here in the bottom. And I can right-click on the image and look for an option called File Info. And when I open up the File Info pane, for this particular image, I get the IPTC metadata fields and categories for assigning information to the digital image. If I go into the camera data field, you will see that this image file contains information about this particular image. It was acquired using a Nikon D300S camera. It has the date of acquisition, which actually in this case is wrong because I didn't set the date and time when I took these images. Had I done that, this date and time would be accurate. It tells me my shutter speed, my f-stop, all of the values related to the exposure settings of the camera at the point when the photograph was taken. My IOS speed was at 400, my focal length was set to 25 millimeters, and it even tells me what kind of a lens I had on the camera, the fact that the flash didn't fire, etc. Over on the right hand side, I have the pixel dimensions of my image, 4,288 pixels wide by 2,848 pixels high. The orientation is normal, shot in landscape view, and the resolution is 300 ppi, pixels per inch. So this data will follow this image wherever it goes for the life of the asset. I can also add my own custom information by choosing other fields within this IPTC user interface. So for instance, I can come into this field and I can go ahead and type my name in as the asset creator, the photographer. I can put my job title down, address, and so forth. And so all of these fields are really, really helpful. You may end up finding yourself working in for a company or within an organization that has a specific way in which it wants you to archive and manage digital assets related to a project. There might even be somebody in the office whose job is that very thing. They are a multimedia asset archivist or manager, and their job is to tag every multimedia asset that you acquire or create and keep it backed up so that anybody within the organization can access that, usually through some sort of server-based management utility, so that those assets are available to everyone who needs to have access to them as long as those assets are needed. And this becomes a really important part of the multimedia producer's life, and it's managing data and keeping track of the many assets that are going to accumulate on the drives and on the servers that you're working with professionally.